Welcome, dear listener. You're here now, and there's no need to rush. Wherever you are, maybe curled beneath soft blankets or quietly nestled in your favorite chair, I invite you to take a slow, steady breath. Let the hum of your day slip quietly into the shadows. Let your body become still, your thoughts gentle, your breath slower. You're with the sleepy historian now. This is a space for calm bedtime storytelling, a place for falling asleep to boring history, gently, comfortably, with soft-spoken stories and ambient sounds that echo through time. Some call it boring history. Some call it a sleep story. But here, together, we'll simply let it be peaceful, because not all stories must thrill. Some are simply meant to keep us company as we drift away. Tonight's tale comes not from a battlefield or the royal throne, but from somewhere quieter, somewhere hidden behind thick walls and cloistered gates. Tonight, we visit the convent. You've likely heard of nuns, women of devotion and silence, but have you ever wondered, what did medieval nuns actually do at night? Did they sleep peacefully? Did they pray in candlelit chapels? Did they keep secrets whispered only to the stars? This isn't just a history story. It's a boring history for sleep. A story so gently told, so softly layered, that your mind can wander off and your eyes can close without missing a thing. We'll explore the rhythm of a nun's nightly life. We'll learn about the rituals, routines, and rules that shaped her world. We'll step into shadows of ancient abbeys, past locked doors and winding corridors, and listen for what still echoes there. This is bedtime relaxation through soft storytelling, a quiet journey for fans of archaeology, gentle documentaries, and slow history. So now let's begin. Where are you listening from tonight? A quiet room? A bustling city? Somewhere in the countryside? Wherever you are, you're welcome here. You can pause. You can breathe. You can simply be. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Sleepy Historian channel. We're building a little sanctuary for the sleepless, a place of soft-spoken documentaries, of calm bedtime storytelling, of peaceful, boring history to fall asleep to. Let this gentle narration be your companion as sleep approaches. And if you find yourself smiling or drifting off, maybe give a video a quiet little like. It helps others find this sleepy corner of the internet. Now imagine a stone convent under moonlight, the sound of sandals on flagstone, the hush of parchment turning in candlelight, a dozen women, wrapped in woolen habits, whispering evening prayers, and one, perhaps still awake, wondering. Tonight, we begin our journey behind those ancient walls to uncover what medieval nuns did at night. You're safe, you're warm, and the world of the waking is far away now. Let's begin. Picture this: a small stone convent nestled in the countryside, far from bustling cities, far from feasting halls and royal courts. Surrounded by a low stone wall and bordered by orchards or gardens, it is quiet now. Even the birds have hushed their songs. The sun has dipped behind the trees, and shadows stretch across the worn cobblestones. And then the bell rings. Not loudly, not frantically, just a soft, steady chime from a modest tower. The sound drifts across the fields and into the air like a whisper. This bell does not call armies to arms. It doesn't summon nobles to dinner. It marks a different kind of hour, the beginning of Compline, the final prayer service of the day. Inside the convent, the nuns already know. They've been waiting for that sound, that steady punctuation at the end of their long, structured day. You might imagine nuns spent their days in endless prayer, but their lives were far more layered. Their days were defined by labor and liturgy, carefully choreographed into sacred routine. The hours were split not by sunlight or appetite, but by the divine office. 8 specific times of prayer, beginning before dawn and ending with Compline just before sleep. By evening, The sisters were tired. Physically, spiritually, perhaps even emotionally. They had tended gardens, copied texts, nursed the sick, baked bread, spun wool. Each task done quietly, deliberately, as if every stitch and step was itself a prayer. Now, they moved toward the chapel, sandals brushing softly over cool flagstones. Heads bowed, hands folded, they walked in silence, not out of repression, but reverence. Inside the chapel, the light is low. Candles flicker in iron sconces. The air smells of beeswax, old books, and lavender tucked beneath robes. A chill lingers in the stone, softened only by the warm breath of voices raised in Gregorian chant. Imagine the sound, not performance. Not even music as we think of it, but a soft echo, ancient syllables gliding over marble, blending together into something weightless. The sisters do not look at each other. They do not need to. They've stood here every night. Same prayers, same rhythm. The body remembers. The voice follows. Compline is a prayer of completion, a surrender of the day's effort, a letting go of the earthly to prepare for sleep and whatever dreams might come. After the final amen, they bow, not deeply, just enough to acknowledge the sacred stillness that now settles over the building. And then they leave as silently as they came, some to their cells, some to shared dormitories, some still clutching prayer beads, their lips moving quietly as they're continuing a conversation that does not end with words. Outside, the bell is still now. Only the stars remain awake. The evening prayers are done. The last candle in the chapel is extinguished, and the nuns return, slowly, quietly, to the place where even breath feels sacred, the dormitory. Unlike the private chambers of nobles or the hay-strewn huts of peasants, a nun's sleeping quarters were designed with a very specific purpose. Not comfort, not individuality, but discipline, humility, and shared silence. In many convents, the dormitory was a single long hall. Imagine a narrow room with a low timber ceiling. Thick stone walls embrace the space like a cave. Along one side, small beds or wooden pallets, equal in size, equal in simplicity, lined up in quiet submission. No tapestries on the walls, no personal trinkets or colored quilts, just straw mattresses, thin wool blankets, and the ever-present cold. There were no whispered stories, no giggling, no conversations about dreams or memories. This was the grand silence, the sacred hush that began after Compline and lasted until morning light. And it was absolute. If one needed to speak to ward of illness or a fire or something urgent, she would do so in a whisper or with a gesture. But most of the time there was simply nothing, yet this silence was not empty. It was full of discipline, yes, but also peace. It allowed for stillness, for contemplation, for drifting gently inward toward prayer or sleep. Before lying down, some nuns would kneel at the side of their bed for one last silent prayer. Others would make the sign of the cross over their pillow. These weren't rituals of superstition, but gentle reminders that even rest was a form of worship. There was no lamp beside the bed. Only a few candles glowed from the hallway, their light creeping in through gaps in the old wood. And so, each nun wrapped herself in the cold comfort of habit and humility, hands folded, eyes closed, breath steady. The air held the scent of wool, beeswax, and the faintest trace of the herbs used to scrub the floor that afternoon. Lavender, rosemary, earthy and clean. One by one, sleep settled over the dormitory like a veil. There were no dreams of riches, no ambitions to climb higher, only the quiet rhythm of acceptance, of living each day not for glory, but for grace. And in this shared sleep, side by side, equal in rest as in faith, the convent pulsed with a different kind of power, not the power of armies or kings, but the power of peace. Imagine you are warm beneath a rough wool blanket. The air in the dormitory is still. Cold, only the distant creak of beams and the occasional sigh of slumbering breath. And then, softly, as if the night itself whispered, a bell, again not loud, just a single tone, steady and clear. It doesn't jolt, it summons. This is Matins, the midnight office, one of the most mysterious and demanding pieces of monastic life. While the rest of the medieval world slept through the darkest hours, many convents require their sisters to rise from bed sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., not for punishment, not for work, but to pray. Half asleep, the nuns stirred. They moved in silence, slipping feet into worn leather slippers, wrapping shawls around their habits. No chatter, no complaints, just a quiet rustle of linen and straw. They filed into chapel once again, the same cold stones beneath their feet, the same wooden benches, the same soft candlelight glowing in the dark. But this time, the world felt different. The air was heavier, the silence outside, absolute. Matins was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be humbling, a reminder that devotion did not keep human hours. The prayers were longer, the psalms deeper. Each word was an offering of discipline, a surrender of sleep for something unseen. Some sisters sat with heavy lids, blinking against the pull of fatigue. Others recited from memory, the verses long woven into the fabric of their minds. A few nuns, if particularly aged or ill, were excused. But for most, this was their daily, or rather nightly, rhythm. After the final lines were chanted, they would leave just as they came, in silence. Some convents allowed them to return to sleep. Others required wakefulness until the dawn prayers of lauds. Either way, their night was broken, not by fear or chaos, but by faith. Outside, frost might cling to the chapel windows. A fox might prowl the hedgerow, unaware of the soft chanting within. The stars blinked overhead, cold, distant, watching. And inside that stone-walled space, lit only by flickering flames, a circle of women whispered sacred words into the dark. They did this not for recognition, not for praise, but because this quiet, persistent obedience was the shape of their lives. It is easy, from our world of electric lights and midnight snacks, to find it strange. But for them, this rhythm, broken sleep, whispered prayer, long silence, was its own kind of peace. And perhaps, as you rest tonight, you might feel it too, the gentle hum of the ancient world, the heartbeat of those who rose while others slept, and the slow, deliberate beauty of a life shaped by reverence. Her name was Agnes. We do not know her surname, not for certain. Perhaps the scribes never bothered to write it. Perhaps it was left behind the day she stepped through the convent gates. But her name, Sister Agnes, appears in faded ink on a weathered vellum ledger from the year 1281, tucked in a quiet corner of northern England. She was not a saint, not a rebel, not a queen in disguise. She was the nun, an ordinary one, but that, in itself, makes her extraordinary. Imagine her at 17, standing outside the convent gates for the first time, the road behind her dusty, the world she knew receding with every step forward. She wore simple wool, no jewelry. Her hair, once brushed by her mother's hand, now hidden beneath a veil. The choice to enter the convent wasn't always her own. Some girls came willingly, called by faith. Others were placed there by families eager to secure salvation, reduce dowries, or balance inheritances. Whatever her reason, Agnes entered, and with that, she entered a life of unseen rhythm. No more festivals, no more dancing around the maypole, no more idle laughter with sisters or cousins. In the convent, Everything had order. She learned Latin chants, not songs. She learned to illuminate manuscripts, not weave garlands. She learned when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. But Agnes wasn't unhappy. At least, the records never suggest it. One parchment, still intact in the Abbey's archive, notes her work in the infirmary. There, she tended to older nuns, bathing fevered brows, preparing gentle poultices, whispering psalms at the bedside. Another mentions her copying religious texts in a clear and practiced hand, a skill requiring steady fingers, great patience, and even greater eyesight. But the most curious note is this. On the eve of All Saints, Sister Agnes was granted leave to remain in the chapel past lauds for personal devotion. It's only one line, but what a line! It tells us she sought something more, that she lingered in prayer not out of duty, but desire, that even among women of devotion, Agnes stood out for her quiet intensity. What did she pray for that night? Peace for her soul? Forgiveness for something unspoken? The well-being of a family she hadn't seen in a decade? Or perhaps she didn't pray for anything. Perhaps she simply listened to the rustle of robes in the darkness, to the soft crackle of candlelight, to the stillness inside her own mind. We will never know how Agnes died. The records fade after 1302. There is no grave with her name. But maybe that's fitting. Her story, like so many others, wasn't carved in marble or preserved in legend. It was lived, fully, quietly, and as you rest the night, you might imagine her, a woman shaped by the rhythm of bells and the hush of stone halls. A woman who found her peace not in grand stories, but in the boring history that still, somehow matters. By now, you may be lulled by the quiet rhythms of monastic life, the prayers, the labor, the silence. But history, even boring history, has its surprises. You see, behind the polished discipline of the cloister, there was something more, a world not free of misstepped temptation or whispered stories. Let's step into one such space, the scriptorium. This was the room where sacred texts were copied by hand, a place of precision, repetition, and deep spiritual focus. And yet, it's here that a rather curious scandal unfolded. It begins in the year 1326 in a Benedictine convent in East Anglia. A nun, her name scratched out of later records, was tasked with illuminating a large psalter. A psalter was a precious book, usually the Psalms decorated with gold leaf, swirling vines, tiny animals, and divine figures. To work on one was a privilege and a temptation. The scandal began not with a cry or a confrontation, but with a footnote. A monk from a nearby priory was brought in to assist with binding. He had quiet eyes, a careful manner, and, evidently, a weakness for poetry. They worked in the same room, not always speaking, but aware of one another. Their hands passed pages. Their pens sometimes touched the same inkwell. And over time, the margin notes changed. Not prayers, not instructions, but lines like, "Your gaze brings light to darkest night. In silence, your nearness stirs my soul." These weren't holy verses. They were fragments of longing. Now, this wasn't the only such case. Records from other convents show that forbidden affection wasn't unheard of. In some places, love, or something like it, grew behind walls meant to shield the soul. The scandal in East Anglia grew when another nun discovered one of these notes, tucked not in the margins, but between the pages. The abbess was furious. The psalter was confiscated. The monk sent back to his priory. And the nun? Her punishment was recorded simply. Removed from scriptorium duties. Assigned to cellar for bread duty. We don't know what became of her. She may have repented, quietly faded into obedience, or perhaps, in the still hours of the night, she whispered those poems to herself. Was it love? Was it loneliness? Was it simply the soul reaching for something human in a life built to transcend it? In the end, the scandal was small. No one died. No flames consumed the convent. But the echoes remain. Because sometimes, even in the sacred hush of the cloister, the heart speaks, quietly, rebelliously, with ink and breath in trembling hands. And if you find your thoughts wandering tonight, you're in good company. Even a bored nun, beneath candlelight, found herself drifting into stories not written in the rule of St. Benedict. In the spring of 1374, records from a convent outside York tell of a nun who vanished. No warning, no note, no signs of struggle or violence. Her name was Marjorie, and her story, once whispered through stone cloisters, was almost forgotten until now. Marjorie had been professed at age 22, known among her sisters for her singing voice and quiet composure. She was the kind of nun who followed the rules, who kept her eyes lowered, who never asked for more than what was given. But something shifted. The records never say why, only that she had grown unsettled of heart. A vague phrase, a soft way of saying that Marjorie longed for something outside those walls. And one morning, she was gone. The porter had not seen her leave. No one had heard the gate. But her habit was found folded neatly at the foot of her bed, alongside a small wooden cross. In its place, she had left only a cloak, walking shoes, and silence. Weeks passed. The abbess was furious, but not because of the scandal alone. No, it was because she suspected where Marjorie had gone. You see, there was a shrine, some 30 miles away, the tomb of St. Everilda, a woman who had, legend claimed, fled her own arranged marriage and founded a convent in defiance of her fate. To many women, St. Everilda was more than a holy figure. She was an escape story, and Marjorie, in her quiet way, had gone to find her. We don't know how she made the journey. Perhaps she begged for food. Perhaps she slept in barns. Perhaps she walked barefoot at times. But one thing is certain. After 3 weeks, she returned. Thin, pale, silent. She carried a small stone taken from the shrine. And when asked why she had gone, her reply was this: I needed to ask her how to stay. She was not cast out. She was punished, required to sleep in the infirmary for a month, to eat only bread and water, and take a vow of silence longer than most novices. But she stayed. She lived many more years at the convent. And one final note, written in careful script decades later, tells us this. Sister Marjorie was kind at the end. She smiled often. She spoke little. Her singing voice never quite returned, but she hummed. It is a simple story. Not dramatic, not saintly, but like so many of the boring histories that fill the spaces between great wars and royal lines, it hums with meaning. A young woman who broke the rules, not to escape forever, but to return whole, to ask, in her own way, how to live a life she didn't choose, and to make peace with it. As you breathe in the stillness tonight, imagine her walking those long country roads, one foot in front of the other, will cloak snapping in the wind, and a question in her heart, a question you may have asked yourself at times, quietly, when no one is listening. How do I stay when I want to go? Imagine walking through a crumbling ruin, a cloister open to the sky, no roof above, just clouds drifting quietly overhead. Birdsong echoes where chants once rang. Moss clings to worn pillars, and wind now moves where once only soft-footed sisters walked. This is what remains of many medieval convents across Europe. Skeletons of devotion, half swallowed by time. But archaeologists, they listen to what stone remembers. Take, for example, the site of a Cistercian nunnery in Yorkshire. From the ground, it looks like nothing more than scattered walls. But aerial scans revealed a perfect square cloister and small private gardens tucked into its edges. Tiny seeds were found, long dormant in the soil. Violets, rosemary, rue. Not weeds, not random. These were herbs tied to healing, memory, and ritual. So, these women were not just praying, they were tending to their bodies, their minds, and each other. Other excavations have unearthed even stranger relics. In a Benedictine site near the coast, a full set of iron writing styli was found, buried in a hidden cavity beneath what would have been the abbess's quarters. Why hide writing tools? Scholars suggest they may have belonged to a nun secretly copying texts outside of official duties, or perhaps composing something of her own, a private chronicle, a poem, a record of thoughts never meant for others. These artifacts whisper of a life rich in quiet intention. Every scrap of parchment, every carved lintel, every bone carefully exhumed tells us they were not idle, they were not passive, they were makers of books, of balm, of community. One particularly haunting find comes from France, a convent long since dissolved. Beneath the choir, hidden in a narrow wall niche, researchers found a single slipper, made for a child. Simple leather, worn through at the toe. There's no record of children living in the convent. And yet, here it was. Was it a keepsake? A relic of a child left behind? Or something far older, a symbol of innocence buried alongside sorrow? We may never know. But this is the strange comfort of boring history. It does not shout. It lingers in foundations, in fragments, in things once held and long forgotten. And sometimes what it does not say is as meaningful as what it does. As you rest now, let your mind drift through these ruins. Trace the outlines of cloisters overgrown. Imagine the scent of rosemary in the garden. And listen, not for answers, but for echoes. You might imagine that the art of nuns was all order and obedience. Straight lines, holy faces, tidy borders. But the truth, uncovered piece by piece, tells another story. Let's begin with the manuscripts. In quiet scriptoriums, nuns did not merely copy text. They illuminated it. They added vibrant borders, small creatures, swirling vines, and holy imagery. But look closer and you'll find oddities. In the margins of a psalter from the late 13th century, copied in a convent near Ghent, a tiny rabbit is depicted holding a sword. On another page, a nun is seen balancing a fish on her head, and nearby, a cat playing the bagpipes. Why? Historians call them drolleries, humorous or symbolic images that fill the empty spaces of medieval manuscripts. But when nuns drew them, the meanings could be personal, hidden, even rebellious. One theory suggests these images were a subtle pushback against strict enclosure, a private wink to the absurdity of rules, or a way to release playfulness that had no other space to live. It wasn't just on paper. Let's talk about embroidery. Nun embroiderers were responsible for some of the most intricate altar cloths, vestments, and decorative panels of the medieval church. Silk threads, gold work, patterns that took months, even years, to complete. And in some of these pieces, if you look carefully, you'll find more than flowers and crosses. One famous piece from southern England shows a saint surrounded by birds. But nestled among the goldfinches and swans is a crow. Just one, eyes red, beak slightly open. It does not belong there. Scholars suggest it may have been a symbol of grief, or a nod to personal sorrow stitched quietly into the work. After all, who could question a bird? Who would even notice? These women lived lives without privacy, but their art, that was theirs. A space to feel, to question, to mourn or laugh, or say things they could never speak aloud. And what's most astonishing, these works survive, pressed between vellum pages, tucked in museum drawers, or hung in dim chapels, unnoticed by hurried tourists. They are the unspoken prayers of the bored, the faithful, the quietly rebellious. So tonight, imagine the steady hand of a nun, needle moving in rhythm, a secret smile at the edge of her lips, not because the image would change the world, but because it meant something to her, and that sometimes is the most powerful thing a human can make. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of nothing, not the hum of your fridge, not the passing car, not the screen quietly buzzing, but a deeper, older silence, the kind you find in stone halls, where noise is sacred because it breaks the stillness. In medieval convents, silence was discipline. Speech was restricted to designated times and spaces. Many orders practiced what was called a grand silence from sunset to sunrise. But that doesn't mean these places were quiet in the way you might think. They were filled with sacred noise. The toll of the bell. This wasn't a casual sound. It was a heartbeat of the entire day, calling the sisters to prayer, to meals, to sleep, to wakefulness. Each bell had a name, a tone, a meaning. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. These were more than prayers. They were hours, carved into the rhythm of the day. And when the bell rang, everything changed. Even the air shifted ever so slightly. Then there was chanting, women's voices rising not in harmony for performance, but in unity for God. Gregorian chant, plain chant, and later polyphonic hymns filtered softly through cloister walls. You might imagine it echoing down a narrow hallway, soft leather shoes on the stone, a flickering candle casting long shadows as the chant rises in the chapel. These were not performances. They were offerings, and for the listener, a lullaby of faith. And then there are the accidental sounds, the rustle of habits, the creak of a wooden bench, the crackle of a fire in the scriptorium, the clink of a ladle in a pot. Even these were part of the oral world of the convent. To the modern listener, they might seem meaningless, but in a life of structure and silence, every sound mattered. They were comforting, predictable, anchoring. One 14th century nun wrote, "I find God in the bell and again in its echo, in the bread crust break, in the hush of the fire's end." What a gentle way to listen. Tonight, as you settle further into rest, try to hear your own sacred noises, the sound of your breath, the weight of your blanket, the tiny creaks in your home, not as distractions, but as reminders that you're here, alive, listening, just like they were long ago. And in that listening, you're not alone. Let your mind drift gently between two rooms. One, stone-walled and simple, a convent cell, a wooden bed, a small crucifix. The other, filled with brocade and velvet, a noble woman's chamber, fire crackling in a carved hearth, soft fur draped over a cushioned bench. These two rooms belong to women born not far apart, in time, in distance, but in life, world away. Let's begin with the noble woman. She was born into wealth and expectation. From her first breath, her path was paved: marriage, estate, heirs, reputation. She wore silks dyed with crushed beetles and saffron. She ate white bread, roast meat, sweet wine. She had servants, some her age, some younger. Her education focused on etiquette, estate management, and the art of pleasing others. Now imagine the nun just a few miles away. She, too, may have come from nobility. Many did, sent to the convent not by calling, but by arrangement. Too many daughters? One goes to God. A younger sister without a dowry? The convent beckons. Her meals were modest: rye bread, cheese, pottage. Her clothing, simple wool, undyed or gently tinted. Her bed, a board with straw. But here's where it becomes more complex. Though the noble woman seemed free, with music, guests, and gardens, She was bound by her husband's will, her family's reputation, and society's rigid gaze. The nun, despite her restrictions, owned her time in a way many noble women did not. She could read, write, debate theology, tend gardens with intention, sing not to please others, but as an act of devotion. One 12th century letter from a nun to her sister, who had married a lord, says this: "You wear silk and dine at banquets, but I dine on thought and sleep wrapped in prayer." What a line! Not judgmental, not bitter, but aware they had chosen or been placed on different paths, each one hard, each one limiting, but also, in strange ways, full of unexpected freedoms. The noble woman bore children in pain and silence. The nun bore silence as a daily discipline. One could travel, but never truly rest. The other rested, but rarely saw the world. Tonight, as you lie in your own bed, consider both women, the one wrapped in furs, the one wrapped in vows, not rivals, not enemies, just two reflections in the glass of time, each asking what it means to live a life not entirely your own. Picture a folded letter, wax-sealed, delicate script drawn in charcoal ink. It smells faintly of rosemary and old secrets. This letter, penned by a noble woman in a stone manor, was not for her husband, not for her steward, not for the court. It was addressed to a nun. You see, for all their wealth and influence, noble women often crave counsel, spiritual, emotional, even intellectual. And who better to write than the sisters who lived beyond the court's reach? Medieval convents were centers of correspondence, not gossip, not politics, but deep, searching communication. A 14th century duchess wrote regularly to her cousin, a nun in France, about everything from childbearing fears to doubts about her marriage. Her words, "Your silence holds more truth than my banquet hall ever could." These letters were more than friendship. They were lifelines. Some nobles even treated certain nuns as living saints, women of such perceived purity or wisdom that their words carried divine weight. They would request prayers, relics, advice, or even cloth touched by the nun's hand. In turn, the convents often relied on these noble patrons for donations, books, candles, land, or funds for repairs. It was a curious economy, one of spirit and silver. Let's not forget the art of the letter itself. Some of these communications were beautifully adorned, lined with simple floral borders, blessed with wax seals bearing crests, or folded in elaborate patterns. They were objects of meaning, not just messengers of thought. There's even record of a noble woman sending a lock of her hair to a nun who'd once been her childhood nurse, accompanied by a poem. "Though years divide us and vows set us apart, still you cradle my fears with the hands of your heart." Such gestures, quiet and poetic, remind us of the invisible threads that bound these two worlds. Tonight, let your thoughts drift to those unseen connections, to the quiet, understanding exchange between lives so differently lived, to a nun lighting a candle and unfolding a letter in her cell, to a noble woman clasping a worn prayer card between manicured fingers. They were women of different rooms, but sometimes just one page away from one another. Imagine a quiet courtyard, overgrown with moss. At its center, a low stone marker, the name carved faintly, if at all, the final resting place of a medieval nun. No grand statue, no gilded tomb, just stillness. When a noble woman died, bells rang across towns. Her coffin paraded, masses sung. Stone effigies of her likeness were placed in cathedrals, robes flowing, hands clasped in marble prayer. But the death of a nun? It was quiet, deliberate, and often unrecorded. Burial rites were simple. No fine casket, no adornment, wrapped in a woolen shroud. Sometimes the very habit she had worn for decades. She was laid to rest beneath the cloistered walk or in the convent garden. If there was a gravestone, it bore a single cross, perhaps a name. But despite this apparent anonymity within the convent walls, memory lived differently. It was preserved in whispered stories. In the daily reading of the necrology, a list of sisters' deaths read aloud year after year, in prayers offered not just for the saints, but for Sister Agnes, Sister Hilda, Sister Clare, and sometimes memory found more unusual form. In the margins of old manuscripts, a tiny symbol was added, a rose, a chalice, a sparrow. It meant she is remembered. Occasionally, a nun's writing or song would survive. One 15th century nun from Germany wrote poems about the Virgin Mary. Her verses delicate, bittersweet, almost forgotten, until a scholar found them tucked in the back of a devotional text. She signed her name only as a servant of Our Lady, but her rhythm lingers. Even more often, nuns were remembered not individually, but as a collective, the Sisters of St. Clare, the poor ladies of the Abbey, the Daughters of Silence. It seems, in giving up their names in life, they also surrendered them in death. But is that forgetfulness or something else? Perhaps, in vanishing from the world's record, they hope to become closer to the divine. Less me, more we. Less name, more prayer. And perhaps that's why their stories matter even more. Because remembering them now, in this quiet hour, is an act of rescue. We are their witnesses, their storytellers. Not to awaken them, but to let them rest, fully seen. So tonight, if you feel yourself drifting, know that it's all right. You're falling asleep to a legacy woven in silence. The sleepy historian will remember for you. You're still here, not in a bustling city, not scrolling, not speaking, but listening in stillness. And that, dear listener, is rare. You spent the past while not chasing kings or empires, but walking softly beside women history try to hush. You wandered stone cloisters, breathed the scent of beeswax and wool, and heard echoes of hymns rise beneath vaulted ceilings. You've seen both silence and sound as sacred. You've traced folded letters passed from manor to monastery, and you've stood beside humble graves and whispered names aloud in your mind. Not every history must shout. Some stories, like the nuns we've met tonight, are meant to soothe, to calm the mind, slow the heart, and open a small window into a time that feels impossibly far away, yet somehow familiar. Here at Sleepy Historian, this is what we offer. Not trivia, not lectures, but soft-spoken history documentaries, crafted for bedtime relaxation and ambient storytelling. Our little corner of YouTube is where boring history becomes your best lullaby. A quiet place for fans of medieval tales, archaeology, forgotten women, and the simple rhythms of a slower world. If this journey brought you even a moment of peace, if it helped you drift gently towards sleep, or even just made you smile at a quiet moment lost of time, please consider subscribing. Your support keeps the candles lit. Leave a comment when you wake. We'd love to know what part of the story stayed with you, and where in the world are you listening from? We read them all. Now, take one last breath in. Let it go. The nuns of old are resting. The bells have stopped. The fire has gone to embers. And you, too, are allowed to sleep. Good night. And thank you for dreaming with the Sleepy Historian.